Close your eyes. Listen, that's not the wind in the baobab trees. It's the river whispering a warning. The same river where just last moon, a king knelt in the mud, sobbing as his golden crown sank into the black water. Why would a ruler beg the currents for mercy? Because of her. The maid who carried his shame in a clay bowl and his fate in a single cursed bracelet. This happened in Oyo when kings ruled with iron fists and ancestors walked the mist at dawn. King Adetola wasn't just wealthy, he was obsessed. His palace glittered with ivory thrones and leopard skin rugs, but his heart, hollow as a dry calabash. He hoarded grain while children starved, stole brides from villages, and spat on the sacred aze of the elders. I answer to no one, he'd roar, crushing palm nuts under his heel. But the river answered back. 3 nights ago, the palace woke to screaming, not pain, terror. The king's wife, draped in beads worth a kingdom, lay trembling on the floor. Her hands clawed at her throat, while a simple brass bracelet, the kind sold in village markets for 1 copper coin, glowed red hot against her skin. Where did it come from? No one touched her. No one entered her chamber. Yet there it was, burning, hissing like a serpent until her skin blistered black. The healers fled. The priests burned incense until their eyes bled. And the king? He didn't mourn his wife. He coveted that bracelet because it belonged to Amina, the quiet maid who swept ashes from the hearth. The girl with dirt under her nails and eyes that saw too much. She never begged, never flinched when he kicked her, but last week she vanished, leaving only 3 things. A pile of swept up gold dust, a single yam seed, and the king's stolen signet ring melted around her wrist. Now the river rises at midnight. Cattle drop dead with no mark on them. And every dawn the king digs faster in his courtyard, digging for something buried where Amina slept. What did she hide that could break a king? Why does the bracelet only burn the greedy, and when the elders chant Oya's river drowns pride, why is the king still digging? This isn't a story about love or divorce. It's about the day a maid taught a king what true power looks like, and why the ancestors never forgive. Would you have seen what she saw? The kingdom of Oyo didn't rise on gold. It rose on silence. The silence of bare feet on red earth at dawn, when women carried water from the Niger River in clay pots balanced on their heads. The silence of farmers pressing yam seeds into soil, while elders chanted Ase over the land. The silence of the Oba's palace at twilight, where shadows stretched long across courtyards paved with stones from the sacred Osun River. This was Oyo before the king's heart turned to dust. A kingdom where power flowed like water, not from a throne, but from the respect between people and the ancestors. King Adetola wasn't always a hollow man. As a boy, he'd knelt in the Agbal forest with his father, learning that a true ruler listens to the wind in the Iroko trees, to the whispers of the river goddess Oya, and to the hunger in a child's eyes. But when his father died, Adetola buried wisdom with the bones. He traded the elders' counsel for the clink of copper coins. He draped himself in Aso-oke robes woven with real gold thread, while his people wore rags. Worst of all, he stopped the A2 festival, the night when the kingdom offered yams, kola nut, and palm wine to the ancestors. The dead don't eat, he'd sneer, kicking a calabash of offerings into the dirt. Only the living matter. And in that moment, the ancestors turned their backs on Oyo. You'd find Amina in the quiet places, not in the palace's glittering halls, but in the smoke-filled kitchen where she swept ashes from the hearth. She was 16, with calloused hands and eyes the color of wet river stones, eyes that saw everything, but never judged. While other servants cowered when the king raged, Amina moved like water, fluid, patient, and impossible to trap. She knew the palace's secrets, the loose stone where the Oba hid stolen village taxes, and the secret path to the river where he bathed in stolen leopard oil. But she never spoke. Her mother, before the fever took her, had pressed the truth into Amina's palm. A quiet heart hears the ancestor's voice. So Amina listened. She heard the elders' prayers grow desperate. She felt the earth grow harder and the rains come later. And every full moon, she'd bury a single yam seed in a courtyard, a silent offering the king never saw. Oyo's rot spread like termite dust. When drought came, Adetola didn't share his granaries. He sold grain to starving villagers for their daughters' hands in marriage. One moonless night, the people of Ilorin village awoke to the thunder of hooves, the Sigiri, King's Ekun cavalry dragging away brides as tribute. Among them was Lil Formilayo, barely 12, her wrists raw from rope. Amina saw it from the palace wall. She didn't weep, she didn't scream. She knelt in the dirt and planted 3 yam seeds where Formilayo's tears had fallen. The next morning, every seed had sprouted overnight into vines heavy with fruit. The elders called it a miracle. The king called it witchcraft and ordered the vines burned. That's when the first crack appeared. Not in the land, but in Adetola's golden ring. The signet ring was passed down from Oyo's first Oba, carved with a leopard of courage. One evening, as the king counted stolen copper coins, the ring split down the middle, clean as a knife cut. His griot, royal storyteller, paled. "The ancestors reject your touch," he whispered. Adetola backhanded him. "Fool, it's just metal." But that night he locked the broken ring in a chest and began digging a hole beneath his bed. Why? No one knew. But Amina saw him, kneeling in the dark, shoveling earth into the hole like a man burying his shame. Then came the bracelet of shame. It appeared on market day, sold by a trader with eyes like burnt coals. "Brass from the Niger's belly," he rasped, "for 1 copper coin." No one bought it. The bracelet felt wrong, cold as a grave, etched with symbols no one recognized. But Amina saw the truth. When the trader held it, the shadows around him trembled. That night she dreamed of the river goddess Oya, her hair a storm of water, shouting, "What is stolen must return to the earth." When Amina woke, her hands were covered in river mud. She didn't wash it off. She carried it to the palace courtyard and buried it where she planted her yam seeds. The earth drank it like blood. For weeks, nothing changed. The king grew crueler. The drought deepened. Children's bellies swelled with hunger. But Amina noticed small things. The king's new wife, Iya, flinching when he touched her. The way copper coins vanished from his chest, only to reappear as brass trinkets in the market. And the bracelet, the one no one bought, now sat on Aya's dressing table, glinting in the sun like a snake's eye. Amina never mentioned it, but one morning as she swept ashes near Aya's chamber, she saw the queen staring at her reflection. Her fingers tracing a red mark on her wrist shaped like a tiny closed fist. The elders knew something was coming. They gathered at the Agba forest, where the oldest Iroko tree hummed with ancestral voices. "The Oba's heart is a dry well," murmured Baba Femi, the village sage, crushing kola nut in his palm. "He stole what belongs to the river. Now the river will take back its due." They spoke of Abiku, spirit children who return to haunt the living, and of Oya's wrath when her waters are defiled. But when young Tunde asked how the river would strike, Baba Femi pointed to the palace. "Look where the maid walks." The ancestors speak through her silence. Amina felt it too. The weight in her chest wasn't fear. It was certainty. Like the moment before thunder cracks the sky, she stopped planting yam seeds. Instead, she swept the palace floors with a broom of scented basil, whispering prayers. To Oya! When the king kicked her, she didn't fall. When he stole her last copper coin, she smiled. And every night she stood at the river's edge, watching the water boil where it shouldn't, bubbles rising like trap screams. Then, 3 days before the moon turned black, the yam seed spoke. Amina found it in her sleeping mat, a single seed she'd buried weeks ago. It shouldn't have survived the dry season, but there it was, hard and smooth, pulsing with a faint blue light. When she held it to her ear, she heard the river's voice. The bracelet hungers. The king digs his grave. When the queen burns, our truth will rise. She buried the seed again, deeper this time. But the next morning, Iya's chamber echoed with screams. This is where the silence broke, where the river stopped whispering and began to roar. The screams didn't stop for 3 days. Queen Aya's chamber became a tomb of smoke and sweat. The brass bracelet, the kind sold in village markets for 1 copper coin, had fused to her wrist like molten metal. Where her skin wasn't blistered black, it pulsed with veins of glowing red. Physicians pressed cool leaves to the wound. The leaves burst into flames. Priests chanted the Hwa Gun healing hymns. The bracelet hissed louder, and King Adetola, He stood at the threshold, not with fear but hunger. His eyes devoured the bracelets. Eerie light, his fingers twitching as if he longed to rip it from her flesh. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Proof of power." That night, Iya's screams turned to gurgles. Her lips cracked like dry riverbeds. And the bracelet? It grew harder, scorching the silk sheets, melting the copper bangles on her other arm into slag. The kingdom held its breath. Farmers abandoned their fields, staring at the palace where smoke now coiled from Iya's window. Not from fire, but from steam rising off her skin. Children covered their ears against the queen's death rattle. Even the king's Ekun cavalry dismounted, whispering that the ancestors had finally answered their stolen brides with a curse. But Adatola doubled down. He ordered the palace gates barred. No one leaves. No one enters. He dragged Iya from her bed, strapped her to a stool in the courtyard, and made the entire kingdom watch. "See," he roared, kicking her swollen legs. "Oh, this is what happens to traitors." She stole from the royal treasury, but Amina knew the truth. Iya had never touched the treasury. The queen's crime, begging the king to return Funmilayo to her village. As the sun beat down, Iya's tears evaporated before they hit the ground, and the bracelet, it began to pulse, thump, 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 like a second heartbeat. Then came the first ghost. At midnight, as Amina swept ashes near the queen's chamber, she heard it, a gurgle from the courtyard well, not water, words, a child's voice choked with mud. "Funmilayo, help." Amina froze. Funmilayo, the 12-year-old, stolen from Ilorin. She was dead. The king had choked her when she bit his hand. Yet the voice came again, clearer. "The river is full of us." Amina dropped her broom. The well's darkness swirled, not with water, but with hair. Long black hair, tangled with river reeds, rising like a serpent from the depths. Amina stumbled, back as a pale hand slapped the well's edge. Then another. Fingers dragging upward, she ran, but not before seeing the face. Funmilayo's hollow eyes, her mouth sewn shut with river grass. The dead were climbing out of Oyo's wells. Aditola saw it too. He didn't pray. He didn't flee. He dug. All night, the thud, thud, thud of his shovel echoed through the palace as he widened the hole beneath his bed. At dawn, he emerged, face smeared with mud, dragging a sack of stolen copper. Coins. He dumped them into the hole, then poured palm oil over them. "Take it back!" he screamed at the earth. "Just stop the burning!" But the bracelet on Aya's wrist flared brighter. That afternoon, her fingernails fell off like burnt twigs. And the king's sack? When Amina passed the hole later, it was empty. The coins had vanished. Only the smell of river mud lingered. The elders tried to intervene. Baba Femi led 7 priests to the palace gates, cola and palm wine in hand. "Oba!" he called. "The ancestors demand restitution. Return what was stolen. Funmilayo's spirit, the village grain, the brides." Aditola laughed. He ordered his guards to pour boiling water on the priest's feet. I answered no river, no ancestors, but as he turned away, his signet ring, the one he'd melted back together, shattered again. This time, the pieces crawled like beetles into the dirt. That night, the king woke to whispers under his bed. Not words, sobs, the sobs of every child he'd starved, every woman he'd sold. He lit a torch and saw them, tiny shimmering figures of mud and reeds pressing their palms against the wooden slats. "You stole our yams," they chorused. "Now the earth steals you." He screamed for guards, but when they arrived, the figures were gone. Only the smell of wet soil remained. Amina made her move. While the kingdom watched Aya waste away, Amina gathered what the king had forgotten. The power of silence. At twilight, she knelt where she'd buried the glowing yam seed. She dug with her fingers until she found it. Still, pulsing blue. Holding it to her ear, the river's voice was urgent. "The bracelet is river gold, stolen from Oya's belly. Only the earth can reclaim it." Amina understood. The king hadn't just hoarded grain, he'd melted sacred river gold into coins. That was what the ancestors demanded back. But how to return it? She remembered Baba Femi's words. What is stolen must return to the earth. That night she stole into the courtyard, not to the king's hole, to Iya's feet. As the queen writhed in fever, Amina pressed her palm to the blistered skin below the bracelet. She whispered the oldest Yoruba prayer for the dead. Ejo, Emajo. Let the dead rest, let the living heal. The bracelet reacted instantly. It jerked like a live thing. Aya gasped. Not in pain, but relief. For the first time in days, the red veins in her wrist dimmed. Amina knew she'd found the key. The curse only burned the greedy. Iya, who'd begged for mercy, was innocent. The bracelet wasn't punishing her. It was trapped in her. As dawn broke, Amina did the unthinkable. She touched the bracelet. It should have seared her flesh. Instead, it felt like cool river stone. Iya's eyes flew open. You see it? She rasped. The faces in the fire? Amina nodded. Familiayo? Iya's tears fell. She says, the river is hungry. Adetola discovered Amina's secret. He burst into the chamber, whip in hand. Witch! He spat. You're feeding her lies. But when he lashed Amina's back, the whip snapped in half. He raised his foot to kick her, then froze. Amina stood perfectly still, the yam seed glowing in her palm. The river knows your heart, Oba, she said, her voice echoing strangely, as if layered with 100 others. It knows you buried Fumilayo's body under the palace latrine. It knows you stole the sacred gold from Oya's shrine. The king staggered back. How could she know? He'd done it himself under cover of storm. Amina stepped closer, the seed's light painting shadows on the walls. I'll return what you stole, or the river will take you. Adetola didn't strike her. He ran straight to his bedroom, to that hole beneath his bed. What he unearthed broke him. The sack wasn't full of coins. It held Fumilayo's hair ribbon, the one she'd worn the day she was taken. Adetola fell to his knees, clutching it. For the first time, his voice cracked like a human's. I didn't mean the fever took her so fast. But the hole wasn't done. As he wept, the earth shifted. Mud oozed from the walls, forming shapes. Tiny hands, a child's foot, and a necklace of river shells. Fumilayo's grave. Adetola screamed, not in rage, but terror. He scrambled to rebury the ribbon, but the mud reached for him. A cold finger of wet soil wrapped around his ankle. He kicked free and slammed the trapdoor shut. But the damage was done. When he emerged, his eyes were hollow. He ordered the palace gates opened. Bring me the elders, he whispered. All of them. The restitution began. At noon, the king stood before Babafemi and the village, Iya trembling beside him. He returned the stolen brides. He opened his granaries. He even knelt in the dirt of Ilorin village, pressing yams into the hands of Funmilayos. Parents, I am sorry, he choked. The elders nodded, but Babafemi's eyes stayed hard. The river does not forgive with grain, Oba. It demands gold. Adetola paled. He ordered his guards to fetch every copper coin in the treasury. They melted. Them down in the courtyard furnace, all 10,000 coins, into a single heavy disc. As the molten metal cooled, the elders chanted, Ejo Emajo. What is stolen returns to the earth. Adetola carried the disc himself to the Niger River's edge. He raised it high, ready to cast it into the water when the disc glowed red hot in his hands. The river rejected him. The disc didn't sink. It hovered above the water, vibrating like a struck drum. From the depths rose a sound, a roar like 1,000 rivers crashing at once. The water churned black. Shapes formed in the foam. Funmilayos faced the stolen brides and the starved children. Their mouths opened in silent screams. Adetola dropped the disc. It hit the river's surface and bounced like stone on stone. Why won't it take it? He screamed at the elders. Babafemi's voice was grave. Because you returned copper, Oba. Not the gold you stole from Oya's shrine. The king's face went slack. He hadn't melted the sacred gold. He'd hidden it deeper, in a cave behind the waterfall, where no one could find it. That night, the curse escalated. Iya's bracelet exploded, not with fire, with river water. A geyser erupted from her wrist, drenching the chamber. The water didn't pool on the floor. It rose, defying gravity, forming a swirling column that filled the room. Inside it, shapes moved. Funmilayo's ghost, the stolen brides, their hands pressed against the watery walls. Iya floated in the center. Eyes rolled back, chanting in a language no one knew. Adetola beat on the door, but the water held. It shut. Amina watched from the hall, heart pounding. This was it. The river had come to claim its due. But as the water reached the ceiling, it didn't burst through the walls. It poured, not out the window, but into the king's bedroom, through the keyhole, under the door, seeking him. Adetola locked himself in, shoveling earth into his hole like a madman. "Stay back! I'll bury it deeper!" But the water followed. It seeped through the floorboards, rising around his ankles, his knees. He lit torches. The water extinguished. Them! He screamed for guards. The water filled his mouth. As it reached his chest, he saw them. The ghosts in the water, their hands outstretched, not to drag him under, to offer him a choice. One path led down a dark tunnel into the earth. The other led up toward a single shaft of moonlight. "Return the gold," Funmilayo's voice echoed, "or become part of the river." Adetola made his choice. He clawed at the trapdoor, not to bury more, but to escape. He burst into the courtyard, soaked and gasping, sprinting toward the waterfall cave. But Amina was already there, standing before the cave's mouth, the glowing yam seed in her palm. "It's too late for gold, Oba," she said, her voice layered with the river's roar. The river doesn't want payment. It wants truth. Behind her, the cave pulsed with blue light. The sound of rushing water grew deafening, and from the darkness, something began to emerge. Not a ghost, but a figure woven from river mist and starlight. Oya herself. The river goddess had come to settle the score. The king fell to his knees, not in prayer, in recognition, because the figure stepping from the cave wasn't a goddess. It was Amina, but not as he knew her. Her skin shimmered with fish scale patterns. Her hair flowed like the Niger in flood season. And in her hands she carried not a broom, but the original sacred gold bracelet, blazing with the light of 1,000 suns. "You stole from the river, Adetola," she said, her voice echoing with the power of crashing waves. Now the river steals from you." The courtyard fell silent. Not the silence of fear, but the silence before lightning strikes. King Adetola's breath hitched as he stared at Amina. Not Amina. The girl who swept ashes was gone. In her place stood a being woven from the Niger's fury, skin shimmering with fish scale patterns, hair flowing like floodwaters, eyes holding the depth of drowned stars. The sacred gold bracelet in her hands blazed with a light that made the moon shrink. "You stole from the river, Adetola," she repeated, her voice now a chorus of crashing waves and ancestral whispers. "Now the river steals from you." Adetola tried to rise, but the earth held him down. Roots snaked from the red soil, coiling around his ankles like iron chains. He screamed, not for guards, but for mercy. "I returned the brides. I opened the granaries." The river Amina tilted her head, and for a heartbeat, Amina's gentle eyes flickered beneath the goddess's fury. "You returned what was taken from people," she said, "but not what was stolen from the earth." She raised the bracelet. Its light pierced the darkness, illuminating the king's deepest secret. The cave behind the waterfall, where he'd hidden the true stolen gold. The sacred nuggets looted from Oya's shrine. "You buried the river's heart in stone," she thundered. "Now stone will bury you." The ground erupted, not with water, but with river mud. Thick, black, and cold as a grave, it surged from the king's cursed hole, swallowing his legs in seconds. He clawed at the earth, screaming as the mud climbed his waist, his chest. "The gold! I'll return it all!" But the mud filled his mouth, silencing him. Above, the river Amina extended her palm, the sacred bracelet detached from her hand, hovering in the air like a sun. It pulsed once, and every copper coin Adetola had ever melted shattered in the treasury vaults. The sound was deafening. Crack, 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 like 1,000 bones breaking. From the shards rose ghostly hands, Funmilayo's, the stolen brides, the starved children's, reaching for the king. Then the river spoke, not through Amina, through every drop of water in Oyo. The wells bubbled. The dew on leaves trembled. Even the sweat on Adetola's brow sang in a language older than kings. "You called us dead," the river intoned, "but the dead are watching." The mud reached the king's neck. His eyes bulged, not from suffocation, but from what he saw in the mud. Faces, dozens of them. Villagers he'd starved. Brides he'd sold. Funmilayo, her river grass stitches now undone, whispering, "You choked me in the dark. Now the dark chokes you." Adetola thrashed, but the mud was liquid stone. It hardened around him, sealing his lips. His nose, his terror-filled eyes, leaving only his forehead exposed, glistening under the bracelet's light. This was the judgment, not death, transformation. The sacred bracelet shot toward Adetola's forehead like a golden arrow. Where it struck, his skin melted, not into blood, but into river water. A single drop fell from his temple, splashing onto the mud. Instantly, the mud recoiled, as if burned. Where the drop hit, a tiny river sprouted, carving a channel through the hardened earth, carrying the king's dissolved flesh toward the Niger. "Your body feeds the river you defiled," the river Amina declared. "Your greed becomes its current." Adetola's forehead dissolved faster now, his skull vanishing into the stream. But he wasn't dead. His eyes, still alive in the mud, rolled toward Amina, not with hatred but recognition. "You are Oya's vessel," he gurgled through the last. "Patch of skin on his face." Amina's human eyes flashed again. "No, Oba." She knelt, pressing her palm to the mud where his heart would be. "I am the river's memory." Suddenly the courtyard flooded, not with rain, but with river ghosts. Funmilayo stepped from the water, no longer a child but a woman in flowing blue robes, her hands holding a calabash of glowing water. Behind her came the stolen brides, the starved children, their bodies woven from reeds and moonlight. They circled the mud statue of Adetola, singing the Ekula meant for the dead. But this wasn't a funeral song, it was a reclamation chant. "What you stole was never yours," Funmilayo sang, dipping her calabash into the stream flowing from Adetola's. Dissolving face, the river gives, the river takes. "Gold belongs to the earth's bones," the brides echoed, their voices like wind through rushes, not to hollow crowns. The stream grew violent. It tore through the mud, ripping chunks of Adetola's body apart. His arms dissolved into silt, his legs crumbled into sediment. Yet his eyes remained, wide, awake, feeling every grain of himself return to the earth. Theravamina raised both hands. The sacred bracelet split into 1,000 shards, each embedding itself in the floodwater. Where they touched, the water solidified, forming a cage of liquid gold around the king's last living fragment, his forehead. "This is your throne now, Oba," she said. "A crown of riverbed, a palace of mud." Then came the final horror. The cage began to sink, slowly at first, then faster, the gold water dragging Adetola's last remnant toward the earth. His eyes locked with Amina's as the mud covered them. Not with rage, with understanding. He'd spent his life hoarding what he thought was power. Gold, brides, grain. But real power was the rivers, the silent force that fed villages, carried ancestors, and remembered. As the mud sealed his eyes forever, a single tear escaped. Not of fear, of shame. The sinking stopped. Where Adetola had knelt, only a mound of wet earth remained. The floodwaters receded instantly, leaving the courtyard dry except for one detail. The mound pulsed with a faint rhythmic thump, 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 the same beat as the cursed bracelet. The elders fell to their knees, pounding the earth in reverence. "The king lives in the river's belly," Baba Femi whispered. "His heart beats with Oya's current." Queen Iya stumbled forward, the brass bracelet now cold and dull on her wrist. She placed her hand on the mound. "What happens to him now?" she asked. The river Amina's form began to fade, her body dissolving into mist. But as she vanished, her voice echoed with the river's roar. "He waters the roots of the Iroko tree. He feeds the yam seeds in the soil. He is the drought's end and the flood's warning." Then softer, only Amina's voice. "Tell them, Iya. Tell them how the river remembers." Silence. The mound stopped pulsing. The courtyard held its breath. Even the wind died. Then, thump! A single heartbeat deep beneath the earth. Thump! Louder, closer. Thump, thump, thump. The rhythm surged, not from the mound, but from every heart in Oyo. The elders clutched their chests. Children gasped. Iya fell to her knees, tears cutting paths through the dust on her face. The river's heartbeat wasn't punishment. It was a reminder, a living pulse in every villager's chest, binding them to the earth, to the ancestors, to the truth. What you take from the river takes from you. Amina stood alone now, fully human, her hands empty. She picked up her broom of scented basil and swept the mound's footprint clean. Not a trace of mud remained, only smooth red earth. As the first light of dawn touched the palace walls, she whispered the words that would echo in every Oyo child's dreams. The river doesn't drown kings, it turns them into rain. Dawn came like a sigh, where the mound had pulsed with the king's dying heartbeat. Only smooth red earth remained. No grave, no monument, just a faint scent of river mud and scented basil, Amina's broom lying abandoned in the dust. The villagers of Oyo didn't cheer. They didn't weep. They knelt in the courtyard, palms pressed to the soil, feeling for the rhythm that had echoed in their chests all night. Thump, 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 fainter now. Not a king's heartbeat, the river's pulse. Baba Femi was the first to stand. He scooped a handful of earth, let it trickle through his fingers, and said words that would become Oyo's new law. The earth drinks pride, the river gives wisdom. Never confuse the two. For 3 years, the kingdom transformed. The Etu festival returned, not as a ceremony, but as a daily practice. At dawn, farmers left the first yam of their harvest at the river's edge. Children filled clay pots with water, not for play, but to pour over the roots of the Agba forest's oldest Iroko tree, the one where Adetola's dissolved body now fed the soil. Queen Iya, freed from the bracelet's curse, walked barefoot through villages, her hands calloused from grinding maize for the hungry. The king's greed was a drought, she'd tell mothers. Our kindness is the rain. And rain it did. The Niger swelled with clean water. Crops grew twice as tall. Even the baobab trees bore fruit in the dry season. But the truest sign of change? The heartbeat. It never faded. When elders planted seeds, they felt it in their palms, thump, 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 guiding their fingers into the earth. When children skipped stones across the river, the water thumped back. Oyo hadn't just survived the king's sin, it had learned to listen. Amina vanished the next morning. No grand farewell, no crown offered. She simply swept the palace one last time, buried 3 yam seeds where Adetola's mound had been, and walked toward the Niger River. Baba Femi found her at the water's edge, her back to the kingdom. Why leave now? He asked. Amina didn't turn. I was never here for Oyo, she said. I was here for the river. She knelt, dipped her hands in the current, and showed him her palms, covered in tiny, glowing blue seeds. These are Adetola's tears, she whispered. Every drop of rain that falls on Oyo carries his shame, his lesson, his redemption. Then she waded into the river until the water covered her head. Baba Femi waited an hour, 2. When she didn't surface, he turned to leave and saw thousands of blue seeds floating downstream, each pulsing with that familiar thump, thump, thump. Amina wasn't gone. She was the river's echo. But the deepest change lived in the people. Old man Depot, who'd once stolen grain from widows, now guarded the village granaries at night. When thieves came, he didn't shout. He placed his hand on the ground and listened. The river's heartbeat is faster here, he'd murmur, pointing to where the earth trembled with footsteps. Run, or become mud. The thieves always fled. Little Tunde, whose belly had swelled with hunger under Adetola, grew up to be Oyo's first Yalode, female leader. At her coronation, she carried no crown, only a calabash of river water. This is heavier than gold, she declared, because it holds every king who forgot he was human. And for Milayo's parents, they planted a grove of yam vines where their daughter was stolen. When the vines bloomed, the tubers glowed faintly blue. We eat her courage, they told visitors, so we never forget what greed steals. Yet the river's lesson wasn't kindness, it was memory. One scorching afternoon, a trader from Lagos arrived with sacks of copper coins. Buy my wares, he boasted. Gold-plated, fit for kings. The villagers ignored him until he pulled out a shoe-worn brass bracelet etched with the same symbols as Adetola's curse. I'm from the Niger's belly, he claimed. Instantly, the marketplace fell silent. Children stopped playing. Elders gripped their walking sticks. Baba Femi stepped forward, his voice calm as deep water. That bracelet is river gold, he said. Stolen. From Oya's shrine, the trader laughed. Superstition. It's just brass. But as he raised it to the sun, the bracelet glowed red hot in his hand. He screamed, dropping it, but the damage was done. That night, his cattle dropped dead. His well ran dry. And when he fled Oyo at dawn, villagers saw it, a faint blue pulse in the dust of his footprints. The river had marked him. Baba Femi gathered the people at the Agba forest that evening. Moonlight filtered through the Iroko leaves as he crushed. Kalainat in his palm, a ritual once forbidden by Adetola. This is not a story about a greedy king, he began, his voice carrying over the river's whisper. It is a story about what happens when we forget we are part of the earth, not its master. He pointed to the children. You feel the heartbeat in your chest. That is Oya's voice. When you waste water, you silence it. When you steal grain, you drown it. When you hoard kindness, you bury it. He pressed a hand to the oldest Iroko tree. Adetola didn't become rain. He remembered he was rain all along. We are all water waiting to return to the river. A young mother raised her hand, tears streaking her face. But Baba, what if I've taken too much? What if my hands are stained? The elder's eyes softened. Then you plant a seed where you stole. You pour water on the earth you broke. You listen for the heartbeat and let it guide you back. He scooped river mud into her palm. The river doesn't punish. It renews. Adetola's shame feeds our yams. Funmilayo's courage grows in our vines. Your guilt, plant it. Water it. Watch what blooms. As the moon rose, Baba Femi shared the secret the river had whispered to Amina. The ancestors don't live in the past. They live in the choices we make today. This is why Yoruba elders say, Uware eni loinse eni olorin. Your character is the only god you create. King Adetola didn't fall because he was rich. He fell because he forgot his reflection was in the river. He saw gold in the water and thought it was treasure. But the river showed him truth. When you drink from it, you taste your own soul. Greed isn't stealing grain. It's believing you own the earth that grows it. Power isn't a throne. It's the courage to kneel in the mud and listen. This folktale isn't about punishment. It's about belonging. Adetola's body became rain, yes, but rain that feeds the very soil that fed him. His shame became fertilizer. His tears became rivers. His heartbeat became the rhythm of Oyo's survival. That is African wisdom. Nothing is ever lost, only transformed. The child you starve. Her spirit becomes the drought that breaks your pride. The bride you steal? Her laughter becomes the flood that washes your sins away. We are not separate from the earth. We are its memory. So ask yourself, what have you taken from your river? Not the Niger, your river. The trust of a friend you betrayed? The time you wasted? The kindness you hoarded? That thing you stole? It's still in your chest, beating like a second heart. You feel that pulse in your wrist right now. That's not your blood. That's the river remembering what you forgot. What will you return to it before the rain comes? Comment below. What's your river? What does it need back from you? Share your village's lesson. Let the ancestors hear you.